yet another extremely topical and extremely timely AMET webinar. As many of you know, AMET is extremely proud of our weekly webinars and our veritable brain trust of experts. And Efraim Inbar is certainly among those that we rely upon the most. And many of you have come to trust and to be educated as we bring into your living rooms every week our webinars. Because we believe that in a democracy, an educated public is crucial. But AMET does so much more than that. Most every single day, AMET holds meetings on Capitol Hill with members of Congress or the US Senate or their foreign policy staffers. As you know, it is a highly trusted and highly respected think tank and policy institute in Washington, DC. And many of our nation's congressmen, senators, and foreign policy staffers have grown to rely upon us and depend on us for reliable sources of information. And we also write and publish at least one article a week in order to cement a foreign policy that is based on reality and facts as opposed to wishful thinking. We encourage all of our listeners to support us as best as you comfortably can. Of course, as you know, we get no government grants from anyone and depend on you, our audience, immensely. I would also like to encourage you to please support another great institution where esteemed speaker Dr. Efraim Inbar is from, the Jerusalem Institute for Security and Strategy. Kindly support them by going to https://jss.org.il/en/. In my lifetime, I've never seen Israel surrounded by more existential threats. The nuclear talks have drawn on for more than 17 months now. We now know that the Iranians have returned to the table, saying that the International Energy Administration, the IAEA, is not allowed to inspect their suspicious sites, which is precisely what the IAEA was originally established for. We also know that the Iranians have at least 40 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, enough for at least one nuclear bomb, and that they are using their highly advanced centrifuges in places buried deep underground, such as Fordo and Natanz. On top of that, Israel is faced with a profound dilemma of whether to attack or how to covertly attack, knowing that there are at least 150,000 Hezbollah missiles staring down at Israel from the north. We are hoping that the United States under President Biden does finally have a credible plan B and will come to the call of Israel and our Gulf allies besides just in mere rhetoric. We are also seeing the Iranian influence in Iraq, which is profoundly tragic after the United States had invested so much blood and treasure, and of course throughout the Levant. We're also very concerned about the very delicate situation with the Eastern Mediterranean pipeline, where the Iranian proxy Hezbollah, which essentially controls Lebanon, has recently threatened to attack over the drilling in the Karash gas field. Of course, we're all also witnessing an astounding public relations victory of groups like Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas, after their attempted relentless raining down of missiles on Israeli civilian territory. And we do want to thank the US Congress and the State of Israel for the Iron Dome. And this is despite what Article 51 of the UN Charter says about every member state being allowed to defend itself from attack. And of course, we are again very concerned about the United Nations, such as the UN Human Rights Council, who submitted a highly biased, one-sided report against the state of Israel for defending its civilian population and calls for an open-ended perpetual commission of inquiry examining every single Israeli quote unquote transgression or sin since its very founding in 1948. And on top of that, the fact that there is an erosion of support for Israel among the young progressive wing of the Democratic Party and in the United States and throughout many corners of the West is deeply disturbing. Here to offer us some wisdom of how the Israeli government prioritized these threats to Israel's very existence is our dear, deep friend, Dr. Efraim Inbar. Dr. Efraim Inbar is president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Professor Inbar was the founding director of the Begin-Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, a position he held for 23 years, and as a professor of political studies at Bar-Ilan University. He's been a visiting professor at Georgetown University, Johns Hopkins University, and Boston University, and a visiting scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. He's a Manfred Warner NATO Fellow and a visiting fellow at the London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies. He also was president of the Israeli Association of International Studies, a member of the Political Strategic Committee of the National Planning Council, chairman of the National Security Curriculum Committee of Israel's Ministry of Education, and a member of the Academic Committee of the IDF History Department. He has authored no less than 5 books, and by now hundreds upon hundreds of articles. It is indeed a profound pleasure to welcome back once again Dr. Efraim Inbar. Efraim, how do you propose the government of Israel will be handling all of these strategic threats to its very existence?
Of course, the main threat to Israel is Iran. It's unquestionably a major threat. Some would term it as an existential threat because it means it may have nuclear weapons. And this is our main preoccupation. You know, in recent weeks, we've heard from Iranian leaders threats against Israel. They said that they can build a bomb, and we should believe them. They have the technical capabilities to build a bomb, unquestionably. It is a result of their successes in enrichment. We know that they enriched 60% by now. Also, they produce highly effective centrifuges at home. The initial centrifuges were imported. Now they are producing it at home. Iran has delivery systems. They have missiles reaching far beyond Israel. And the missiles are produced by Iranian engineers. And we should realize that Iranian engineers are very good. And at our institute, we have one engineer that deals with missiles, Uzi Rubin, and he is full of appreciation of the Iranian achievements in their missile program. We also know that they have a weaponization program. The archives our Mossad stole from Tehran clearly identify a weaponization program. We don't know at this stage how advanced it is, but it's a question of time until they'll be able to put a bomb on one of their missiles. That's quite clear. Furthermore, the agreement between Iran and the US, in my view, is a foregone conclusion. The US is pivoting to China. It's bogged down in a war in Ukraine against Russia, and it wants to remove Iran from the agenda. It basically wants to kick the can down the road, as the Americans put it. Furthermore, in this international environment, the Americans want very much Iran to export their oil in order to reduce prices, in order to alleviate the situation of the American economy in particular. Of course, the Americans think also about the rest of the world, but primarily of their own. And the Iranians are going along. They want international legitimacy for their program. I never doubted that they are interested in an agreement because it will provide them legitimacy, international legitimacy for continuing their nuclear program, and also a big heap of money. We are talking about at least $100 billion that will help very much the regime to stay in power. Not all of it will filter down, we know that. Some of it will go to the pockets of the leadership. Some of it will go to the proxies. But this will be a tremendous boost to the Iranian economy. By the way, the Iranian economy during the Biden period grew by 5, 6, 7%, despite all the sanctions, because the American administration overlooked the attempt to circumvent the sanctions. So the Iranians have a clear interest in an agreement, and it will be signed eventually. Now, those are the last bargaining moments. And as we know, the Iranians are very good at bargaining. I think I said it several times. In Tehran, there is no fixed price in their bazaar. Americans have a different mentality, and their bargaining abilities suffer because of this mentality. Actually, the agreement, the contours of the agreement is even worse than the 2015 JCPOA. In the meantime, they enriched at 60%. They were successful in making this progress. As mentioned by Sarah, there was no effective inspection because the cameras of the International Atomic Energy Agency were shut down. So we really don't know how advanced they are. Also, they didn't provide any answers to the queries about uranium remnants that the IAEA asked, which probably are connected to the weaponization program. Furthermore, there is no indication whatsoever that the sunset clauses were extended. Some of the sunset clauses are ending in 2 years. I actually asked one journalist in Brussels to ask Borrell at a press conference about the sunset clauses, and he evaded the question. He didn't respond. And probably our worst fears are going to happen. All the weaknesses of the JCPOA are remaining. There is another issue which we don't know much about. Is the US providing guarantees to Iran that they will prevent an Israeli attack? We don't know. And I'm sure that the Iranians, being smart as they are, will ask for such guarantees. We don't know what Biden said. What does all mean for Israel? First of all, lack of legitimacy for a military attack in the near future. Because there is an international agreement that everybody is happy about the agreement and is not primarily concerned about Israel's security. Also, it strengthens Iran in the region. everybody understands that the sanctions are over. Iran will progress on the nuclear path. And this obviously provides additional power to Iran in the rivalry, in the regional rivalry with the Gulfies, with Egypt, with Turkey. I think also that we should be concerned about potential Iranian access to the S-400, the Russians' S-400, as Russia gets closer to Iran. We've seen a summit in Tehran, Putin, Erdogan, and Raisi. And the constraints on Russia that were before on selling S-400 obviously disappeared because of the war in Ukraine and the American position against Russia. The worst thing that could happen is, of course, a regional nuclear race. Everybody is looking at Iran, and if Iran gets even closer to the bomb, I'm sure the other actors, senior actors, like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, will not fall behind. And we know that Erdogan, by the way, said it already in 3 years ago, 2018, September 2018, they are not going to stay behind. I think that Israel should not, and this, of course, would be a strategic nightmare for Israel. A nuclear Middle East is a strategic nightmare because Israel should not entertain any illusions of a balance of terror in the region. We cannot create deterrence, nuclear deterrence in such a situation. The distances are very small. We cannot emulate the relationships that was between the United States and Russia. The small distances are equivalent to a very short warning time. And we cannot take any chances. By the way, the United States for several times got warnings because of Canadian geese. But then there was, it's an interesting story, but then there was a red line between Washington and Moscow, and they fixed the issue. We don't have time for that in the Middle East. Iran is a rational state. Yes, and it behaves rationally. I do not claim that they are irrational, but we should understand the deterrence is based upon sensitivity to cost, and their sensitivity to cost is low. They said that they can afford losing 1 million or 2 in order to destroy the Jewish state. And we should always take this type of sentences seriously. We should not ignore the sentences that are expressed by our enemies. Generally, building a second strike capability, which is critical for a balance of terror, is a process fraught with much uncertainty and depends always upon what the rival is doing, how good are his defenses, how good are his offenses. And this is a dynamic, ongoing process. If we are talking about a multipolar region, multipolar nuclear region, in which we have to defend ourselves from several directions, it is indeed a strategic nightmare. What Israel should do? First of all, we should internalize that we are alone. Nobody is going to help Israel in this predicament. We should be aware of it. No diplomacy, no great powers, no friends we are alone. We should continue to express our public opposition to an agreement in order to gain, first of all, a modicum of legitimacy. We should say, this is not acceptable. And I think the government of Israel is saying it. And is saying that it's not bound by this agreement. There are no illusions. We cannot change the agreement. Our ability to influence America on this issue is extremely limited. Second, I think that we should continue covert operations to slow down Iran. We were successful in slowing down Iran considerably. When we initially, at the beginning of this century, detected the Iranian nuclear program, we believed that if they will not be interrupted, they can get to a nuclear bomb in 5 to 7, 8 years. Now we are in 2022. We gained a lot of time. I'm not sure we used this time judiciously. I think a military strike should have been initiated by Israel much earlier. We are late, hopefully not too late. We should also not hesitate to decapitate the scientific leadership. It is a small number of people. We started doing so, and we should continue to do so. After all, it takes time and experience to build a nuclear bomb, and if we eliminate the scientific leadership, we gain time. We should not entertain any illusions about regime change. This regime has the guns, and they do not hesitate to shoot at demonstrators or at people that voice criticism. There were several times when there were big demonstrations and the regime prevailed. They have no moral constraints to shoot at civilians. It's easier to demonstrate in the United States, Iranians, emigres. In Iran, it's very different. And this doesn't mean that we should not invest, the West generally, but also Israel, in attempts to make trouble to the regime. But we should be realistic that this type of trouble that we are causing to the Ayatollahs is limited and is not going to change the regime. The regime is going to stay. It needs long-term processes, and don't hold your breath about regime change. In parallel, Israel should plan a good military attack on the main critical nuclear installations in Iran. We have a large air force, much larger than countries our size, but of course we are not America. And probably we'll be able to have one sortie, two sorties, 2 chances to do it, not more. And therefore it should be well planned. Nowadays, it seems that Israel is not ready yet. Unfortunately, the Israeli governments have not invested enough money in order to have this option ready now. it may take some more time, and we should not hesitate to put everything we have in preparing this military attack. The bellicose posture of Israel, which many don't like, is to be kept, is to be maintained in order to prepare the Israeli public for an attack. We need domestic consensus, and I think we have this consensus, but it should be maintained. And also to maintain the Abraham Accords. The Gulfies courageously made a deal with Israel and offered Israel warm peace. And they did it, in my view, for one reason only: that Israel will deal with Iran when America is leaving the region. They have all the money in the world. They can buy technology, they can buy medical services, everything they can buy. They have no problem buying anything they need, with one exception: a military strike on Iran. And this is why they need Israel. This is the main basis of the agreement between us, between Israel and the Gulfies. If we don't deliver, they have no reason to be with us. And they'll bandwagon. And they'll go and try to make themselves friendly to Iran. So, and we don't know how patient they are. We have to make sure that we do not let them down in order to maintain the Abraham Accords, which are very important. I think that Israel, at the same time, should suppress any challenge from the Palestinian arenas. I've always believed that we should mow the grass because there is no real solution. I'm not sure we mow each time enough, but this should be done. In order, the Iranians are investing in Hamas and Islamic Jihad in order to cause trouble to Israel. The events of May last year clearly made the point that riots by Israeli Arabs can be very harmful in terms of Israel's national security. Therefore, we have to be very forceful against any type of challenge. I think also that Israel should consider a military strike, a preemptive strike on Hezbollah. Our institute has advocated this measure for a while for two reasons. One, to limit the damage that Hezbollah can cause to us when we go after the Iranian nuclear infrastructure. And second, the Abraham Accords. This will be a clear signal to our partners in the Gulf that we are serious about confronting Iran. So I described not an easy situation, but I will end saying it is in our hands. We can do it. And with enough political will, with enough ingenuity, we can do the job. Even that when we are alone, which is not a very comforting thought. But sometimes you have to do it on your own, and we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Efraim. There are so many things that you touched upon that, of course, we agree with wholeheartedly. I think, the strength of the Abraham Accords was unbelievably beautiful. We're watching this erosion of trust with our Sunni Gulf allies, and we're seeing what they call the diversification of portfolio, and it really troubles me that some of them have actually visited Tehran. It brings to mind the saying of Osama bin Laden: when you see a strong horse and a weak horse, you respect the strong horse. And I think there's only one way to restore this, as you say, and that is for the state of Israel to be able to act alone and not depend on the insurances of any other country. With that, I'm going to turn the podium over to my wonderful esteemed colleague, Hussein Abubakar Mansour, who will field some of the questions that have come in. Hussein?
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much, Efraim, for such a wonderful and concise presentation. And thank you for all our viewers who joined us today, and for all those who sent us questions. Please keep sending us questions through the Q&A button at Zoom, and we will go through your questions in order. Efraim, the first question that we received is, legitimate or not, can the world accept the risk of Iran with a nuclear bomb? And if we're not, are we not talking about a conventional and possibly a nuclear attack on Iran?
Well, I think that first of all, we should use conventional means. And if I say I'm pretty sure that we can deal with conventional means, we don't need to use nuclear weapons to destroy those installations. I don't want to go into technical details, but the operational plans. But every such installation has a door. There is an opening, despite the fact that some of them are within mountains. And there's, maybe we need also boots on the ground. Probably there will be also boots on the ground, but I'm sure we'll have the volunteers to go. When I was young and in the paratroopers, and I didn't have white hair, they tell me to go anywhere, I'll go anywhere. I think the same spirit still is with the idea.
Thank you. Would it be best if Israel attacks and eliminates the Iranian nuclear program before a deal is signed, quote unquote signed?
In my view, the deal will be signed soon. And unfortunately, Israel seems not to be fully prepared for conducting such an airstrike, or, there is also a naval option. So it is probably the hurry the Americans are in will eventually prevail in terms of the time clock, time. So I don't think it will be before that, unless the Iranians continue to procrastinate and hope to get more concessions from the Americans. But I think it looks that they realize that they maximize whatever gains. They gave up on the demand to remove the Revolutionary Guards from the terrorist list. So I think they are very close to a deal with Americans.
Thank you. Multiple times you described Iran as a rational actor. This, of course, strikes a lot of people as a weird characterization of the Iranian behavior. How do you reconcile, a claim to rationality with their, ideology and call to the destruction of Israel and destruction of the United States?
I'm talking about, being instrumental. Everybody has its own values, and everybody is ready to die and to kill for its values. This is a different discussion. Even liberal countries, democracies, are ready to fight and to destroy other countries because of their values. I'm not talking about the values. I'm talking about if they want something, they know how to do it, and they do it rationally. If somebody wants to commit a suicide and shoot his knee, this is not rational. This is not instrumental. That's not the best way, rational way to do it. And they are very good at achieving their goals. Their goals are obviously motivated by their ideology. Their patience is the result of their beliefs that God is on their side. And you cannot really have a better ally than God. And eventually God will help you win. But this is a different thing. So they are ready to pay high price. The low sensitivity to cost is partly a result of their zealot religiosity. And of course, because they don't care, like most Middle Eastern leaders, they don't care about the people.
Thank you.
And this is rational from their point of view.
Right.
Because the people don't affect how that regime conducts its business. In a democracy, it's different. You have to take into consideration what the people say. In a dictatorship, you don't have to do that. So you don't care about the people. And they are rational. They know. They build a wonderful, most impressive network of proxies in the Middle East. They are good. They know what they are doing. They are very good at taking advantage of every weakness of their rivals. See what they built in Lebanon. Lebanon was a country, independent country. They succeeded by using their proxies to take over Lebanon. Look what they're doing in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. This is not only a question of ideology. It's a question of knowing well how to achieve your goals.
Yeah.
It's a formidable rival.
Thank you. Of course, and I think by many accounts, it's very obvious that Iran is far more successful than many of its own Arab rivals. And as an ideological regime, it's far more successful than any other ideological regime that ever came to existence in the region, whether Nasserism or Baathism in Syria or Iraq. So that's a testimony to the ability to rationally calculate steps that you spoke to about, Efraim. All right, we have a question assuming, all right, let's just assume the worst. Tomorrow, Iran becomes a nuclear power. They get a nuclear weapon. Following that, most likely you'll have more nuclear powers in the region. So the Saudis are going to go get nuclear hits from Pakistan or somewhere else, and you're probably going to have Turkey and Egypt nuclearization as well. If we reach that situation, wouldn't that establish successful nuclear deterrence against Iran?
I don't think so. I think it will be a nightmare because everybody will be afraid of everybody else. And, let's go to the simple example. When you have two gunners in a Western movie, the one that is better off is the one that draws first. And is successful in killing the other. So the mere fact that two powers have nuclear weapons doesn't mean that there is stability. This is a myth. Actually, when two powers have nuclear weapons, there is a great incentive on both sides to preempt. So in the Middle East, if we'll have this situation, everybody will think how to move. It's not pleasant.
Thank you. Do you receive? Sorry.
Therefore, it's so important to prevent Iran to become nuclear, not only because of Israeli security, because of the security of all the Middle East and maybe other places.
Right.
I can tell you, for example, a nuclear Iran will affect the nuclear balance in the Indian subcontinent. Iran borders Pakistan. Pakistan will have to take into consideration a nuclear neighbor. The changes they will have to make into their nuclear posture will affect India and maybe China afterwards.
Right.
So it's easy to talk about nuclear weapons stabilizing the situation. It is a talk of irresponsible academics.
Right.
Right.
Can I just jump in here? First of all, this myth that assured nuclear destruction, can contain Iran is ludicrous. And also, we have been very privileged in the past to have scholars and experts such as yourself. And a few weeks ago, we had Dr. Emanuele Ottolenghi from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And Hezbollah has an increasingly encroaching presence in Latin America. They are importing missiles to Latin America. We know that, and we also know they have cells in the United States, and Iran is hard at work building intercontinental ballistic missiles. They don't need intercontinental ballistic missiles to go from Tehran to Tel Aviv. They need them to reach the United States, the great Satan. So I just have got to, respectfully submit that, as Winston Churchill said, those who feed the crocodile are only eaten last. We're doing this at our own peril here in the United States. Go ahead, Hussein. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No worries. And about Efraim, last remark. I don't know how familiar a lot of our audience and viewers with a lot of the academic production now when it comes to nuclear proliferation, but you do have actual academics, as Professor Inbar said, who are actually putting out the idea that more nuclear weapons will actually be better and will be safer and will create a much safer world. And you would find them actually promoting, letting Iran have a nuclear weapon. So this irresponsible scholarship is actually now a solid part of the scholarship of nuclear proliferation and international relations. We've received a multiple of questions asking, throughout the time, we've heard a lot of timelines about Iran nuclear breakout, that according to a lot of them, Iran actually has already built some number of nuclear warheads. Do you believe that? Do you believe that Iran maybe now secretly already has a nuclear warheads? And if Iran one day reveals the existence of those warheads, would Israel then attack Iran?
I think we should not wait for that. We should do it as soon as possible. We missed since 2012, when the first attempt to reach a decision in the Israeli government, and it didn't pass, unfortunately. We wasted time. I think we should have done it much earlier, even before 2012, when they had just the gas, uranium. When they take the uranium ore and make out of it uranium, gas, that is fueled into the centrifuges. This would have been, it's a big target. We missed it. We are very late. I think the world, including Israel, made huge mistakes in not dealing with this issue much earlier. We are at the last hour.
Thank you. We received a question about the Abraham Accords countries. As Sarah mentioned earlier, some of them are already sending ambassadors to Tehran, trying to build back channels with Tehran. So we received questions asking, can we truly count on the support and alliance with the signatories of the Abraham Accord since the Abraham Accords, since they are now re-establishing relations with Iran?
The Gulfists, like all normal people, are hedging their bets. And they want to be safe. So if they look at Israel, if Israel hesitates, they have to reach the conclusion that maybe the decision to come to a peace treaty with Israel was a mistake. There is a necessity to deal with Iran urgently. We don't have time. And if we can count on them, of course not. We are on our own. We've always been on our own. And even, the limited support we got from the United States, which was critical. But remember, in 1973, it took some time until the American government decided to help us. Afterwards, it took some more time for the American airplanes to fly to Israel, because no European country, no NATO country was willing to let them land. This should be in our memory. We should understand that there are certain situations in which Israel is alone. And now it's one of such situations, unfortunately. We are alone and nobody is going to help us.
Thank you. We received a question actually about the Silex enrichment technology, which basically it's a form of enrichment. I think it was discovered in the 90s, and it uses laser to separate isotopes. And basically, it can offer a really quick path for nuclearization. So we received a question: are the Iranians using this technology at all? Does it play any role in their nuclear program?
It's essential. Initially they tried the plutonium road, but the Russians that sold them a nuclear reactor are very good at inspection, and they take the rods of the uranium reactors, they take them back and don't allow the Iranians to process those rods and try to extract the plutonium, which is there by the mere activation of the reactor. So they decided not to go to they went to the enrichment of uranium, which is a separate road and which is more difficult. But eventually they made it. They are enriching uranium at 60%. From there to 90% is not a big effort. It's not a technological effort. It's just they have enough machines. They produce. Now they are using already. They installed already in Natanz their own made centrifuges, which are 10 times as fast as those that were used, allowed by 2015 JCPOA agreement. So they have the technical capability. This is essential. This is for producing the material, the fissionable material for a nuclear device.
Thank you. And we received another question asking, what are the chances that Russia, Putin, is basically increasing support to the Iranians in order, or in a way, to help the Iranian become nuclearized, and that way opening a second front against the United States? Is there any chance that this is a part of the Russian strategy at all?
Well, it's very difficult to read, Putin and what he thinks. I think so far the Russians have been careful in not proliferating. They were better than the Canadians or the French. So they are careful, generally careful. When they sell nuclear technology, it's usually supervised by them. Nowadays, of course, they are at war with Ukraine, and the Americans are ready to fight Russia until the last Ukrainian. And so they have a problem with the United States. Iran is an anti-American actor, and in this respect, they are allies.
I also want to interject here that it doesn't seem like one hand of the present administration knows what the other hand is doing, because, as you know, Iran has been selling drones to Russia to execute their war in Ukraine, and we're supposed to be an ally of Ukraine.
And their drones are probably not very effective, I read. So
yes, yeah.
By the way, Israel also sold drone technology to Russia. So
this was many, many years ago, right? So,
it's a business in which there are no clear interests and definitely no clear moral rules. So Iran is a tool for Russia against the Americans, but also for the Chinese. So this is a new alignment in the Middle East, and the Russians, depends how bad situations they are in, may be tempted to show greater largesse in the nuclear area. But so far, I think that they behaved responsibly and more responsibly than Western powers.
Thank you. I'm going to try and combine a few of the questions that we received together. We've received a number of questions asking about the U.S. motives, naturally. So some of the questions, since the agreement, whether there is a JCPOA or the future proposed agreement, they don't really prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Ultimately, they don't. What does the United States expect to gain from the new agreement? Is the United States willing to allow Iran to become the regional hegemon? And if so, why?
Well, I think that Obama said it quite clearly, that he leaves the region to a balance of power mechanism. So let natives take care of themselves. It's not America's business. America wants to leave the region and to focus on more important issues, which I definitely understand. That China is a big challenge, and Iran is a small potato for the Americans. Their threat perception from Iran is much lower than Middle Eastern countries and Israel, of course. So it's far away. The Americans live with a nuclear Korea, North Korea. So they live also with a nuclear Iran. America is a big country and is a strong country, and it believes that it can deter nuclear attacks on its territory because it is such a powerful nuclear, has such a powerful nuclear arsenal. This is why America is basically not, I think it's a mistake in terms of their own policy. I think nuclear proliferation is not good for them. And if we're talking about climate change, which is at the very high on the American agenda, so a nuclear winter, is not going to help the climate situation. But this is an American decision, and Israel can do nothing about it. And this is an administration that has no real strategic weight, and no strategic thinking, and this is the result. By the way, even Trump was not ready to initiate a military attack. He said it openly. So that's it. America is what it is, and we have to live with it.
I want to apologize to all of our viewers who we didn't get the chance to go through their questions. And we thank you again for all the questions that you sent us. The last question that I'm going to ask you, Efraim, from the list of questions that we received. Actually, we received a number of questions asking about Israel. Obviously, a lot of our viewers are worried that the political situation in Israel, in terms of the instability, almost a political chaos that's happening, impedes the ability of Israel to confront Iran in such a very sensitive time. Do you believe so? Do you believe that the current Israeli political situation is actually a liability at the ability of Israel to protect itself against this Iranian nuclear threat?
I seriously think that what's happening now in Israel in the political arena is hampering Israeli deterrence. They look at the countries that has so many elections, and there is so great animosity between political leaders, and no government lasts more than 1 year. This is not something that signals great power. At the same time, I must say, we have elections, and the country is functioning well. We have a strong economy. The military, the establishment, various establishments of the foreign policy, the military establishment are continuing their work. We have, of course, like other countries, many domestic problems. We have strikes, but the country is functioning, and it's functioning rather well, despite the fact that the politicians are fighting all the time. To some extent, it reminds me, the French Fourth Republic or post-World II Italian politics, where the country was blooming and functioning, and the political system was largely paralyzed. But we should not underestimate the effects of this type of political crisis. But still, the country is doing well.
And I'm sure the military is planning as well, making plans, and the military functions very well. At this point, first of all, I want to thank you, Efraim, for your copious knowledge and wisdom, and for all that you have done and will continue to do for the state of Israel. I also want to give thanks to my esteemed colleague in another think tank, the Jerusalem Policy Center, Shoshana Bryan, who we had on last week, and who reminded us that if anything constitutes an international treaty, this deal does, and it has to go to the U.S. Senate to be ratified by 2/3. That means they'd have to get 65 senators to vote on it. So we encourage every single one of our listeners to write to their senators and say that this must be taken up as a treaty, and hopefully it will be dead in its tracks. Let's hope. I mean, the Constitution does have
the prerogative not to do it.
Yes, please. I mean, they. Yes, right. They might make an end round around the Constitution like Obama did, And we also have the Iranian Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015 that says every detail, every side deal, any kind of agreement with the Islamic Republic of Iran needs to be looked at, and it needs to have a free and open public debate by our members of Congress. So we should remind our Congress people and do whatever we can to exercise the constitutional checks and balances that we have in our system. And with that, I want to offer my profound thanks to you, Efraim, for your wisdom and knowledge, and to all of the people in our audience today. I will see you.
God bless you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.